All right, so then this last one is one that we both love very much, and that's Bob Roberts, which was written and directed by Tim Robbins, starring Tim Robbins, music written by Tim and David Robbins. It's a mockumentary about a right-wing folk singer who makes a run for U.S. Senate in Pennsylvania. And, I had almost forgotten to put this on my list of movies, but it's so good. And you were kind enough to lend me your DVD copy so I could just rewatch it again to freshen up on it. And man, that is a fantastic movie.
Yeah.
It's just so good. I mean, everything from the concept to the execution. It has this great plot. It's very, very funny, and then it gets very, very dark towards the end. There's this real sense of evil in it, but it's also, a kind of light, goofy satire at times. Great cast. Tim Robbins is actually really good in it. I mean, he's really just like believable as this guy, because if you know Tim Robbins' personal politics, you know how much contempt he has for people like Bob Roberts.
Yeah.
But he plays it so well. The songs are so funny. I mean, like some of the lyrics are just so ironic. Like I just love, because it's folk songs. It's Woody Guthrie, Bob Dylan. A lot of his albums are satires of the of Dylan albums, like the Freewheelin' Bob Roberts, Bob on Bob. The Times Are Changing Back. That's a funny one. And then I love the song that he sings about how grandma felt so guilty about being rich.
Yeah. Yeah.
My grandma, but then I'm going to take my inheritance and invest it with pride. And then he leads this whole sing-along about that. It's so clever. And this is a bygone era when like liberals were cool and countercultural and edgy and funny, before liberals became so like miserable and mean-spirited in all like the woke stuff and like snarky and condescending, like Stephen Colbert and all this stuff like that. It was back when liberals were like the underdogs. It was made in 1992, so it was after 8 years of Reagan, 4 years of Bush 1. And like I said, it's sort of a time capsule of that period where like even mainstream Democrats, and I'm not talking about necessarily the politicians, but like a lot of Democratic voters were like, opposed to interventions in Latin America, which is sort of a sub theme of the movie. And they were anti-war. You had Gore Vidal, famous leftist public intellectual, excuse me, play the rival candidate, the Democratic incumbent running for Senate. And so it's just a cool movie in so many ways. And the sort of mockumentary style of it works so well. The acting is so natural. And it's really fun.
Yeah, no, I love it. So it's funny how it's like, I think they use the term rebel conservative a few times in the movie. How the fact that like when you associate folk singers, it is obviously with liberals, people of that ilk, yet you listen to them with that folk, that he even has like a Joan Baez partner at some point in the film. And yet
he does all kinds of roots music. He doesn't just do folk. He does blues. He does gospel. He does all kinds of
roots music associated with conservatism. It's so weird. And what's interesting is that there's never been a soundtrack for that movie because he never wanted those songs to be used as anthems for actual Republican politics, which obviously you can get away with that now because obviously with the invention of, you can just rip the songs from the movie, but there's never been any recordings made public of any of those songs, so no one could actually abscond with them. But what I like about the movie is it is, in terms of tone, it is absolutely genius how the movie almost tricks you because it begins as kind of, you're watching, it's like a straightforward mockumentary. I know he was very influenced by Spinal Tap, and I think there's even a scene in the movie where they get lost on the way to the stage, which I believe is a callback to a scene in Spinal Tap.
Well, Spinal Tap, there's that famous scene where they're lost on the way to the stage.
And that happens to Bob Roberts in a scene
with the beauty pageant. Yeah, and it's a long tracking shot. Yeah.
And so the movie goes along, and you think that it's this kind of send up of conservative politics or politics just in general, But then it really does make a turn. And by the end of the movie, you forget that you started this as a comedy, and it's not funny anymore. It's dark. And at moments truly disturbing.
Yes.
And if
Oh
for a
yeah.
comedy, it's like there are some scenes, especially towards the end, that really leave you um, uh, with an impression. And at the end, and it's but it's just yeah, it's so good. And obviously, which I guess we can talk about how even a couple of years ago, Tim Robbins was quoted as saying that Bob Roberts precipitated Donald Trump. And at the end of the movie, I saw such an incredible parallel, because throughout the movie he has these throngs of followers that worship everything he does, and one of them is played by Thin Jack Black. And
Hmm.
at the end of the movie, because like I said, this is a movie within a movie, it's a documentary that's being filmed by a British documentarian. There's a scene at the end of the movie where the they're waiting outside Bob Roberts' hotel or wherever he's staying, and the British interviewer is asking Thin Jack Black, why he loves um, um, Bob Roberts so much, and that sort of personality and the things he was saying is the exact same thing you would see if you interviewed a Trump supporter at like a campaign. It rang so true with the type of people that fall in love and follow those particular candidates. And the British interviewer says, "No, I don't like him. I think he's very bad for your country." And by the end, and they cheer on when Giancarlo, it's my favorite. Giancarlo Esposito was he's the
Esposito.
no, it's wrong.
He doesn't pronounce it Esposito.
No,
How do
so
you
you
know
don't.
that?
Well, because Esposito is Spanish. Esposito is Italian. He's part Italian.
Oh, he's Italian. Oh, okay, interesting.
See, you learned something there.
Didn't know that.
And so he, of course, was famous. He's great in Do the Right Thing. Recently, he's gained fame because he was in Breaking Bad. But this is my favorite performance of his. And they cheer when that character dies, and it leaves you, the viewer, in a really dark place. That these events that we just witnessed were not as funny as we thought they were. And yeah, that is a movie that really, that it's just so well done in every way. Yeah, it's like we mentioned D.A. Pennebaker earlier, and that was directly influenced by his documentary filmmaking. There's even a scene in the movie that is a parody of a scene in the Bob Dylan film "Don't
Right.
Look Back"
Yeah.
that he
Yeah. Yeah.
directed. But yeah, no, yeah, like you said, extremely naturalistic acting. Alan Rickman is very funny as his campaign manager, and yeah, no, that's a great movie that really is not talked about enough.
Yeah, no, it is this kind of strangely forgotten kind of movie, considering how good it is and how relevant many of its themes are. I mean, the thing about Bob Roberts versus Donald Trump, because I actually heard Tim Robbins went on Michael Moore's podcast a few months back, way back towards the beginning of this year, and talked about some of the similarities, between Bob Roberts and Trump. And it's true, they were both celebrities. They both had a very sort of cultish following. And yes, you're right. I mean, in terms of like the nationalistic, jingoistic, patriotic messaging, there's certainly some similarities there. However, the interesting thing about where they're different, and this is something that's new, this is why I say so many of these picks are like from this sort of bygone era, because the thing that Donald Trump did that was so clever and that worked so well for him is that he took this very right-wing message, this very nationalist message, and spoke to a lot of the same grievances that Bob Roberts speaks about in this movie. But Trump took that, and with that message, he actually punched up at the sort of New World Order elite Democrat media complex, and the sort of international organizations like, NAFTA and the EU, right? And so he took this sentiment and punched up at people who his voters perceived were more powerful than they were. Whereas Roberts, was a sort of incarnation of Reagan, and that this reflects when the movie was made. Obviously, the movie was made in the early 90s. Roberts, the messaging was all about the welfare queens, right? The people who are too lazy to work and they just complain and complain and complain. Yes, right. That's one of the famous songs in it. Yeah. So he took this sort of classic, 80s style Republican message of, it's the unemployed, it's the homeless, who are holding you back. Whereas Trump took, a lot of the same grievances that people felt, a lot of the same anger and frustration that they were working hard and they couldn't get ahead and they couldn't, but rather than explicitly, point to the sort of downtrodden and vulnerable, he took a lot of that energy and made it a sort of populist, anti-elite message, even with all the anti-immigrant stuff. Right. It wasn't like the immigrant. Yeah, he said, OK, open borders are bad. They're rapists, they're criminals, they're coming in, they're pouring in. But notice he didn't actually tie the job taking element of immigration to the actual immigrants. Right. He actually blamed the elites for wanting the immigrants to come in to take the jobs of the white working class. And so that was a very clever thing that Trump did that really Republicans were not doing prior to him coming along. So even though there are like some thematic similarities between Bob Roberts and Trump, that's a huge, huge difference. And that reflects the times, right? Because this was the pre-Clinton era. Bob Roberts was the pre-NAFTA era. And so, back then, it was welfare queens, unemployed people, homeless people. You saw, the Vidal character talks about homelessness, talks about poverty, and there's that great scene where they're debating and it just takes like snippets of what each candidate's messaging was. And Vidal was all about people who are more vulnerable, people who are disenfranchised, right? People who are poor. Roberts was all focused at the middle class, saying, why can't you get ahead? Why do you work so hard? And the American dream is not yours. It's because of the wasteful government spending that, politicians like, I forget what his name was, Paste, vote for. And so there are many differences. Once again, it is a sign of the times. Like if you made Bob Roberts today, it would be a much more sort of populist figure. But in many ways they are the same, which is interesting because Trump has governed more or less like a just traditional like conservative Republican.
Okay.
But anyway,
very good,
very good.
And see, it sounded like there was like a
no. That was basically it. But it's a really fun movie, and you're right. I mean, I guess the turning point of the movie is when there is that sort of fake assassination attempt on Bob Roberts. Or was it a fake assassination attempt, or was it just an assassination attempt that didn't succeed? In other words, I forget, did they stage the assassination?
Yeah, they staged the assassination.
They staged the whole thing, right? Yeah, that's what I thought. And that's really the turning point. Once, from there on, it becomes a sort of a much darker movie.
Yeah, exactly. No, it's great. It's a great gem of a film, and it has so many cameos in it. So many people.
Oh yeah, Susan Sarandon
and
David Strathairn. Yeah, Helen Hunt, John Cusack.
Yeah,
I love the scene with John Cusack where he just like he's in the middle of shooting that promo, and he just puts his hand on Bob Roberts' guitar and says, "I'm out."
Yeah.
No. Yeah, and leaves. No, it's a really, really fun movie. And, I mean, thematically, that's an interesting sort of hook there that like it starts out this joke and ends up being more serious because, people thought George Bush was a joke. George Bush II was a joke. His presidency was more tragic than funny. And now Trump, obviously, people thought he, this buffoon, right? See what happens.